Recovery Sort Of is a podcast where we discuss recovery topics from the perspective of people living in long-term recovery. This podcast does not intend to represent the views of any particular group, organization, or fellowship. The attitudes expressed are solely the opinion of its contributors. Be advised, there may be strong language or topics of an adult nature.
Welcome back. This is Recovery Sort Of, the podcast. I'm Jason, a guy who has not tried Medication-Assisted Recovery Anonymous yet.
And I'm Billy. I'm a person in long-term recovery.
I'm Caroline. I'm also a person in long-term recovery.
And today we have Murk with us. Hi, Murk.
Hi, my name's Murk, and I'm also a person, and I'm also in recovery.
And we thank you so much, Murk, for coming on. I think our experience is every time we have somebody come on, our audience really gets introduced to an entirely new concept or a new understanding of themselves because we relate in on so many different areas, right? Maybe we got here from struggling with a heroin or an alcohol or a methamphetamine or something, but I think once we get here, we start to see how many different pieces of healing we need in different areas where we struggle. So this is one that I feel like we have wanted to do for a long time and just struggled to find the right individual. And so I'm just thrilled you're here. And I think the best place to start talking about Medication-Assisted Recovery Anonymous is for you to tell us a little bit about how you got here and what made this program the right fit for you.
Okay, yeah. So, first of all, I'm glad to be here and be having this conversation because not so many years ago, we wouldn't be able to have these conversations. It'd be like taboo. There isn't these other things, or there's this one other thing. It's called Smart Recovery. Go there, get out of here. That was about
right.
That was about the extent of it. So I just appreciate the opportunity. Back in March of whatever year, maybe 2020, something like that, the world stopped. My world stopped. It was time for me to go back to work. Within like the next month or two or whatever, and that just didn't happen. And I had to not do anything, it was like stay home and everything was closed. Like, you had to go to the grocery store for 8 o'clock, whatever. So I was forced to sit with myself and it didn't take very long, maybe like a couple weeks. And I was like, just thinking about my life and where I was at, and I wasn't content with it. I wasn't happy with it. And I realized that what I was doing for work was just like keeping me busy, occupying me, and I was just going through like day-to-day motions, and I wasn't focused on like who I was, what I wanted, what my purpose was. I wasn't focused on making my life or myself any better. And it just didn't feel right. So I've always been passionate about medication-assisted recovery just because I got on medication like over a decade ago. And when I did, it was very new. And it was like, I don't know how else to say it other than just like people hated it. There was like a lot of stigma around it. So I've always been passionate about talking to other people that utilize medication and letting them know that nobody has to say that it's okay if it's working for them, right? So, what else do we do when we have nothing to do? I like get on the internet, right? And I find a group of people that are meeting, and they talk about supporting medication-assisted treatment and medication-assisted recovery. And I was like, oh, well, that seems pretty cool. So I'm going to check it out. So I got onto a meeting, and there was people who were like talking about things that I really related to. And people were having the same issues that I've gone through. Maybe some of them I worked through, maybe some of them I was still going through. And it was just, I don't know, it was just really cool to me to see people openly talking about taking medication in a room, because I've really never seen that. And when I've done that, it wasn't taken very well by a lot of people, because people are just like, you shouldn't do that, you can't do that, and all that stuff. Yeah. So I made connections, and that's like what I was missing in my life, right? Was like human connection, because I quit doing drugs a lot of years ago, And then I pretty much just disconnected from the world and I stayed busy. And yeah, so to be able to connect with other people, then other people that I could relate to, man, that made me start realizing my purpose. And maybe my purpose was to be around people like that and to help people advocate for themselves and to help people understand that they can be in recovery whenever they say they are and it's not up to anybody else. Like, we don't have recovery police. We do have professionals, that do provide services in addiction, and they tell us that medication is okay. So yeah, just I don't know, just the connection of it is what it did. And I just stayed involved in it, and I have been ever since. And it sounds so stupid, but I think that it really changed my life. Where I'm sitting at today, I'm fulfilling my purpose, right? Like I moved, I got out of where I was from because what I was passionate about it wasn't a good idea to talk about it there and advocate. It just wouldn't ever work out. I could like talk to people, but I couldn't ever do any advocacy or make any changes without putting myself at risk, I guess you would say. That's how it can be sometimes in small towns. And now I get to do that. And yeah, that's about all I got until you ask me questions.
That's spectacular. I gotta ask. You kind of talked in more vague or generalized terms. Where was it, or like, have you had encounters with more traditional 12-step fellowships that felt like you were stuck on your own in this?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, I'm from the birthplace of AA, within like an hour of that, which, Akron, Ohio. So I've come to learn that it's a little bit different there. It's I don't know, it's like going to a church that's like an old world church, and it's still the way it was in 1840. It's like it's very much like that. It's very sit down, shut up. Like, don't talk to anybody for the first year.
Everybody's got their
You're
Dr.
just
Bob
here.
necklace on.
Yeah. It's like I've learned through being in other parts of the country, it is very different there. So my experience is unique and it might be different, but it's the one that I've had. And yeah, just to me, I didn't get better by people being like that to me. I got better by people being compassionate to me and caring for me, and it didn't kill me. It helped me to continue to live. It helped me to find my will to want to live. So yeah, and medication, geez, you don't want to talk about that. I've seen people God, that have maybe been in a program for like a couple years and they're doing great. And what do? We stop using drugs, alcohol, whatever it is, and we connect with people that we feel are like us, and we want to be honest, right? So eventually it comes out and they tell somebody that they're on medication, and one of two things happens. They're told they have to get off in a timeline, or they're just told to go somewhere else. And when they're told to go somewhere else, nobody knows about anywhere else. Nobody knows where the anywhere else is or the other places. It's just open the door and get out. So to me, that doesn't help people get better. That doesn't. Yeah. So
Right.
I've never gotten behind that. I've had a problem with that since forever. So it probably gave me an inability to get better through those programs because of that. Just because it just didn't fit my beliefs in the way that I like to live my life.
Yeah. I think, structurally, whether it was intended or not, at this point, it does feel, at least it did feel to me, like the vibe was second-class citizens, which didn't feel real great either. But it's just interesting to talk to somebody who maybe has the actual experience, right? I can sit here and complain from a soapbox, but I don't have the lived experience. So I was curious. I don't want this to totally be about like the interesting beginnings of the Mara program, and yet I think from what I heard, I was fascinated by it anyway. So I do think it's an interesting piece of it. Do you mind talking about that a little bit? Do you know a lot about the beginnings?
I'm not sure which part you're talking about. If you want to go a little deeper.
Yeah. So The information I got, I guess, was that Mara was not founded or started by someone who was actually on medication. It was started by somebody who wasn't, which I guess to me, when I think about the beginnings of 12-step and the idea of one person in the situation with the experience helping another, that kind of is contrary to that. So it was really fascinating to hear.
Yeah, so the person has a history of substance use, alcohol, maybe. I'm talking vague. I shouldn't share somebody's information, but yeah, they see it one way, but they actually, this hypothetical person we're talking about actually did take medication for alcohol use disorder, though.
Oh, okay.
Which is medication assisted treatment. So,
okay.
But that's not why it started, right? It started because he's seen a need for people that like needed other places, right? Like he had been around the rooms himself, and then he got into the field as a counselor, and he's seen that the traditional way, whatever it was, just didn't work for some people. So he started asking them questions like, well, why doesn't it work? You know, and like, okay, and what do people always say? The first thing, it's like the God thing, right? Like people that get into recovery, some people just can't go into a room and ignore that word, right? Or ignore a small prayer. It might be small to somebody that believes in God, but to somebody that has very different beliefs, like that just turns them away. So he just starts taking notes, like what don't people like? You know, what keeps people from going there? Because I think if you get in the addiction field at all, you'll see that a lot of people do fall out of those cracks. We're overexposed to it, right? So we go to meetings all the time, and we're there with all the people that stay there and that it works for. And we don't necessarily see the people that it doesn't work for.
Right.
So we always think that number's higher of the people because like, oh, there's 80 people in this room. But for every 80, there's a lot that get lost. They don't know where to go. And maybe they needed something just a little bit different. Yeah. So there's that. And then just working in methadone clinics and seeing people throughout the years in the programs abstinence based, and they get to this point in their life where they're like, hey, like my family trusts me again, and like they have this will to live again, and they like feel free and they can move on with their lives. He's seen that happen with people in the methadone clinic too, just the same. And it was no different. The only difference in those people is one took a medication and one didn't, but they were both getting better. They both had people in their lives that they broke trust with that trusted them again. It meant the world to them, and they wanted to continue living. So yeah. And then there was actually, you know, back in like 2018, my dates are probably off and I'm guessing, but back in 2018, there was groups like all over the country that were having meetings kind of about medication, but he started looking around and most of them were just like AA and NA groups that accepted medication. They weren't like their own thing. So they still had those things in them that some people wanted to veer away from, right? So he just organized what was already there and came up with different stuff and got rid of a lot of that stuff that doesn't work for people, or people that doesn't work for some people. I shouldn't say that. So yeah, that's about it.
I'm actually really glad I asked now, because my initial take on it was, this egomaniac. he got in recovery and thought, I'm gonna solve somebody else's problems, right? And now
he's definitely like one of us, right?
Oh, okay,
so
right.
He's just a humble dude, and
I'm picturing it now. Like he's like almost one of the best of us. Like this guy went out of his box to try to help other people. I'm like, damn, that's actually pretty impressive, really. Whole different take, whole different flavor in my head of this individual at this point. So what would you say as an active member of Mara, like what kind of differences you were just talking about when he was creating this? He wanted to create some shifts away from things that don't work. What kind of things are different that you feel like are helpful in Mara?
Okay, so first off, the thing, we just got to get it out of the way, because just the God thing, you know, there is 12 steps and there is 12 traditions, but they're not copy and pasted and changed a couple words or whatever. So that's a huge thing. And I saw that right off rip, right? Because like I don't want to talk too much about my personal beliefs, but my personal beliefs, I do believe in God, religion, all that stuff. But that was a huge thing for me in traditional recovery, right? Like the hypocrisy of it, right? Like if I go to church, we're going to talk about God, we're going to say some prayers, and we're going to say that's what we're doing. But in there, I felt like I was told a lot of the times that like that's not what we're doing, or I heard it said to other people like, oh, just replace that word with something else or whatever. And for somebody that has absolutely no belief, that's absurd, right? For me, okay, I understand maybe a little bit more because I have a close relationship with religion and God. But for other people that don't, and even on the other side of it, right? What about people that do believe and we're out and we're addicted to substances and we're living that life? I see this happen a lot, right? And if you're religious and you go somewhere and you're going to be held accountable and you're going to write out lists and all these things about God, you're going to feel shame, right? And that scares people away. Even though that's a part of their life, maybe right then, it's just not the right time. So, and it's not in there. So, it's not that you can't be like, if anybody can come there, right? That's the whole thing. If somebody is like a full born believer in God, preacher, minister, whatever they are, or they recover through Jesus Christ, like cool, come here. But also, if you don't, you can also come here. So it's not like agnostic, it's not secular, it's just not put in there anywhere. And I think that's huge.
Yeah, it almost feels like what you're saying is that it's not. I don't want to say that it's not part of the program. Well, maybe, yeah, maybe
it's not foundational.
It's not part of the program. It can be an addition to your program if that's something you believe in. Like you can use it in your program, but it's not a part of the program itself.
I mean, it could be the whole base of your program if you want it to be. That's the thing about it is like it's open-ended, right? So
Right.
it could be everything that you hear in there and all of the steps that you read, you could that could relate some way through your belief in God and how you're going to recover through it. Or if you don't, it could not. So it's completely open. And that's what I really like about it.
You mentioned the steps, and I read through these the other night, and I'm going to read at least one now. They are written extremely different than what we're used to. Like you said, many 12-step programs, when they borrow them and get the permission from AA, it's replace the word. It's replace alcohol with narcotics. It's replace alcohol with food or eating or disordered eating or something. And these are very different. And I guess my problem initially reading through them was like I liked what they said better, the description, and yet it was so wordy I thought it sounded stupid at the same time. So like I'm going to read one. Step 1. We admitted that without help, we felt an inability to control many of our behaviors and that our lives had become unmanageable. Like that is exactly, I think, the description of what we're saying in step 1, and yet
Yeah. So
it's
so what
wordy.
word don't you hear in there? What's the one word that's missing? That powerless, right?
Powerless.
And that's another thing that people struggle with. And people get in traditional recovery, I see people get so hung up on that damn word. They're like, I can't say I'm powerless. So it's like, okay, let's just take it out of there then. Is it that important, really? Like we had an inability to control many of our behaviors. Our life was unmanageable. Boom, that's it.
Right.
Language is important in the rest of the world, and it's starting to become important in recovery in some aspects.
No, absolutely. It's interesting too because step 2 mentions power, but in a different way. It's we came to believe that, like all human beings, our power was limited, and we needed to learn to let go and learn from others. I'm like, that is so not what the second step says in 12. No, but it's so interesting. Oh, and I got to read 3 too while we're at it, and then I'll shut the fuck up. I promise. 3. We made a decision to accept that we cannot control everything, assuming a mindset of goodwill, seek the wisdom of responsible others, and discover our true voice within. Holy shit. We made a decision to accept that we cannot control everything, assume a mindset of goodwill, seek the wisdom of responsible others, and discover our true voice within. That's hella directions for a third step.
Yeah, so I'll say that I think that they just lead to empowerment, straight up. That's what I see happening when I hear all of the steps, and it's all so much, but it feels like empowering to a person. It's not like, go to this person, get your answers, go to this person, write this list. It's like, I don't know, it's more in the person's control. And I'm a huge fan of like person-centered recovery and care. It's the most effective thing.
So we at one point did a step a month, like we did an episode each month about the step of that month, and I thought it was really interesting. And now I want to go back through and do a step a month, but do Mara's steps and like dissect them and see if because they're interestingly written. Like I'd really do. I want to like spend more time with them and think about them, but I know that's not exactly what this show is about. So to get back maybe a little more to the Mara topic, are these meetings available in person in a lot of places yet? Or did a lot of the... I was going to also add on to that, so maybe answer that one first, and then we'll get there.
Yeah, so if you go to the website, it's mara-international.org, and you can check out all the in-person meetings. There's a decent amount. There's much more online. After COVID, a lot didn't start back up. But I know that happened with traditional meetings too. I know the area I'm in, for some reason, places where meetings were held, they're kind of just like, oh no, they kind of like COVID gave them a break and now they're just like, no. So a lot of people are having to find new places, but there is some, is there enough? I don't know. I think it's growing as much as it needs to be. And the thing is that we're just letting it grow authentically, right? We're not out promoting. We don't have a bunch of like literature and handouts, and we're not doing outreach in communities. We're just letting it happen. So I think that it has grown though.
Well, and one of the things I was curious about, and maybe you can just talk about the process if somebody was interested in starting a meeting in their local area, maybe they reach out to you. But I was curious, like you mentioned in the beginning, there was like research done about the different groups that were kind of locally forming around the place. Did any of them end up signing up and saying we want to be part of this bigger thing, or we want to switch our format? Or
yes, some have, but at this point, to be honest with you, over the last couple years, we've found that people that really hold on to traditional values and beliefs really just can't. They can only make it so far until they just want to tell people to get their shit together and get off medication and recover the real way. So to be honest with you, no, most of them have gone. There is a couple. There's like 3 meetings like from the very beginning that are still there, but most of them people's personal beliefs have come and gotten in the way, and it's a hard thing to manage, right? Because like it sounds so harsh, but like if you want to recover the traditional way in an abstinence-based recovery, there's 6 meetings every day. 8 o'clock, 11 o'clock, noon, 5, 6, in most people's hometowns. It's okay, just go there. This thing is different, right? It's just a little bit different, and it's we have to protect that, right? Because most of the people that come here have been harmed, shamed, or felt judged, and that's for them to decide. That's not for anyone else to decide, and that's how they feel. So we have to keep that out of there. We've had to put things in there about like using traditional jargon, because we would have people come that used to be in traditional meetings and didn't leave the language behind, and people would leave because they were harmed and they hear that those cliches and they go back to that, they go back to whatever experience they had.
So I have a question, I guess. So when I first started learning about Mara, which has been limited, admittedly, but when I saw the steps, I really liked that you guys had kind of taken this new approach. And I think, when I was speaking with someone else in the program, he mentioned that it kind of had been modernized, and I saw that too, right? Some of the language in the original 12 steps that AA uses, it can be a little bit antiquated, but then also the removal of the higher power concept or God concept. And I think for me, as a person who's struggled with this God, higher power concept, the entirety of my recovery, that piece really speaks to me, right? Because I feel like in some of the more traditional 12-step programs, what you hear is it's okay to have anything as your higher power, and you can have a doorknob, or whatever belief works for you is what works for you. But then yet the experience as someone who doesn't believe in like this sentient, all-loving being, the experience of going through the steps, the experience of reading the literature, you still feel like you're kind of being like guided, like okay, you don't believe now, but like eventually you will if you do this right. Like that's kind of the way that it feels. So from that perspective, this is very appealing to me. Like I see the value in that. My question then becomes, for someone who maybe isn't on medication, what is their experience going to be like coming into this program? Are they potentially going to have the same experience that someone on medication has when they come into NA or AA?
Yeah, my answer to that would be absolutely. We have a lot of people that aren't on medication. They just are the people that traditional 12-step stuff just didn't work for them for whatever reasons. And, it's called Medication Assisted Recovery Anonymous, right? But the medication is in there because it has to be, right? Like, people are so weary that are on medication, like they hear like recovery and anonymous, like they want to go away. So it's in there, but we are open to anybody, and we're open, people that do utilize traditional 12-step come to our meetings too. And that's okay. It's like, it's open to everybody. People that still use drugs, come in, that's fine. Like we're better for somebody to be than a recovery support group that is considering quitting using drugs. I've seen a lot of people told like, yo, come back when you quit, but like, where do you go before you do? And I think today's day and age, we're picking people up like that, and I think it's having a huge impact from what I see every day. So
what are the qualifications for membership? Like a
desire to live a safe lifestyle.
Ooh.
And whatever that means to you. And that, I'll tell you what, that's blown my mind. And God, I've had so much growth over the past couple of years just from that, like that safe lifestyle thing, right? Because I quit doing drugs a long time ago, but I did a lot of unsafe things. I didn't, I was like really ingrained. I had a lifestyle ingrained in me, right? Like from the time I grew up, I thought certain things were normal, and I seen certain things. So just stopping doing drugs, all those things didn't go away, and my behaviors didn't go away. And oh man, when I started hearing like being safe, like I started thinking like, man, is what I'm doing, could I do this safer? It's opened it up. We always talk about, and you hear in recovery, like, oh, the substance use is such a small part of it, but we don't focus on any of the other stuff. And I think just that desire to live a safe lifestyle opens people's minds.
No, I love it. I am interested in some of the different lingo or jargon from your program. Like I would imagine you were talking about some of the old jargon or lingo not feeling good for people or not feeling safe for their life, right? I would be curious, like, how do you guys conceptualize it? Like, what do you say? Do you say you've been in recovery since a certain date, or how do you guys go about that?
Okay, so for that, like, people can identify themselves however they want to. That's up to them. We have a lot of people that come in and they say, I'm Joe, I'm an addict, I'm Joe, I'm alcoholic, whatever. Or a lot of people just say, I'm a person in recovery. That's fine, however people want to. It's when it gets to the point where, sometimes we just kindly ask people, if somebody's always saying, you know what I'm talking about, like one day at a time, all the things you would hear in a meeting that work for people, and they help them. And just kindly asking them and explaining to them the reason behind it. It's like, hey, those are all great things, and I'm sure they help you tremendously, but we just have to leave them at the door. And sometimes it can be difficult, like language for us is hard to change, but I think it's worked out pretty good, and it's kept people around.
Well, one I'm specifically curious about, I'm trying to move away from the word like clean. Like, I'm trying to say I've been in recovery since this date, or my recovery journey started on this date, or do Do you find that more people have kind of adopted that they just use the word clean and refer to what they're doing, or is it a whole new word? Like, how do you guys do that?
Okay, so I'll give you my personal take on it, and I do this outside of meetings too. When I hear people say clean, I just stop them, or I pull them to the side, and I just let them know, like, hey, I don't think that when you were using substances that you were a dirty person. So I don't think that you ever have to be clean. It's up to you, however you want to do that. But also, other people in the room, right? Like I was talking about, people who still use drugs come to our meetings. When they hear that word, even if I'm referring to myself, they might think that I think they're dirty.
Right.
So being mindful of it's not always about me, it's about like everybody in the room. So
Okay. So do you guys have any acknowledgments or celebrations about time or achievements?
yeah, so I'll show you.
What do we call them?
I'll show you. Let me dig in my packet.
I'm getting to the bottom of this.
He's looking
All
for
right.
a new word for himself is
Yes,
what it boils
yes.
down to. That's what
So-
it is.
I don't know
it's
how
blue.
well you can see this. This is a chip, right? And it says a desire to live a safe lifestyle today.
Ah. So
There's one.
I've been living safely since September 12th, 2003.
Yeah, so there's one. If you want to get one every time you go to a meeting, that's cool. If you want to get one because you're celebrating something, that's cool. But there's just one, so nobody's more important or less important than anyone else.
God. Yeah, you're right, Caroline. I am going to love him before it's all over. She was telling me that. She's like, you're going to love this guy.
I
I'm
said,
like,
you guys are going to be best friends by the end of this episode.
I think we are. Is there colors besides blue, or is it always blue?
No, it's all the same.
Huh.
There's no differential, right? So if somebody's like, oh man, I've been living safely for 24 years. It's like, okay, here's your blue chip that says a desire to live a safe lifestyle. And someone comes in and they're like, I've been smoking, not injecting for the last 24 days. Like, okay, here's a blue chip that says a desire to live a safe lifestyle today.
So you guys don't celebrate time then, right? There's no like
I mean,
anniversaries or
no, but if
Okay.
people want to, like, in meetings all the time, people like, it is a huge feat. I know it was a huge feat for me at one point to not inject drugs for one day. So if people want to celebrate, that's awesome, but it's not going to be like traditional, somebody's not going to stand up in a room and come to the front. And that's not to discredit what they've done. It's just to not make the other people feel any less or more important.
One of the things I love about that, and I don't know if we really ever step back with our beginner's mind and think about this, right? But just the idea of like, even as a therapist, when I have people come in, generally people show up wanting to be the rookie of the year client or the MVP client or like the best client you've ever had that you can't live without, right? Like, I would imagine taking out the hierarchy or the power levels of, the celebration or who's got more time or any of that kind of stuff could be removing that focus, right? Like if I come into recovery and I'm like, oh, well, now I've got to be well known in this anonymous program. I want to be somebody, right? Like if I remove the take of there is no somebodies here, it gives me the freedom to just kind of be where I'm at and like explore myself better. So I love that piece of it.
So I have more like kind of dummy 101 level questions for you, Murk. One is, so do you guys have kind of the traditional sponsee relationships within the program? Do you have something that mirrors that, or is that kind of out with the bathwater as well?
So here's what I tell people. They're never going to be coming to meetings and somebody's going to be like, oh, hey, you need to find a responsible person and listen to everything they tell you and they're going to be your sponsor, whatever. That doesn't happen. People do connect with each other and they hold each other accountable and build relationships. But I think it's a thing that we just let happen naturally and authentically and just don't force it, because some people don't need that. Some people don't want it, So like all the other things, it's just trying to keep it open to everybody.
And so then what does working steps within the Mara Fellowship look like?
Okay, so our book isn't published yet. I've actually done them with the person that wrote the book, and it just looked like sitting down with somebody that I trusted and talking about them and talking about my life. It was much, much different than other traditional steps that I've done. It didn't I don't, it's hard for me to talk about that because I feel very strongly about some of the ways that traditional steps are worked and who they're worked with, right? Like,
Go
I
for
don't,
it. We
I
like
don't feel like,
controversy.
I don't feel like if I meet Billy in a meeting and he's just some other dude and I'm just some other dude, that I should sit down and talk to him about like sexual trauma, and all these like deep things that open up wounds with just another person, right? Without that person or somebody in my life telling me like, hey, you should also set up some professional stuff on the side, or maybe just take this all the way to a professional because it gets dangerous, right? Like, especially, we have these 28-day programs, and by the end of it, you got to go through all 12 of these things and talk about a bunch of traumatic shit that happened to you. There's going to be a therapist there while you're there for 28 days, but then you're done and you're out. And a lot of people like are afraid of therapy and professional help, and we tend not to trust people when we first get into recovery. So yeah, that's a big thing, is like they can be as in depth or as vague as you want them to be.
What is your basic text or your big book, or like what does it have a name?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't even know if it has a name.
Okay.
I've just seen what's inside of it. I've never seen the cover, but it's mostly just a step guide, and it has some people's stories in it.
Ah.
But it really, yeah, mostly like the core of the book is just explaining the steps and the reasons behind them, and stories behind them. And
It's
then people's personal
pre-publication though,
stories.
right? Like it's not widely available at this point.
Not yet.
Huh. That's so interesting.
Which has been kind of cool, honestly. Like, it gets annoying. People ask like every day, like, "Oh, where's this book?" But like, we're going on 2 years since we started all the Zoom meetings and everything, and we've survived without a book. We have like multiple meetings every day. People are still showing up and they're still getting stuff out of it. So it'll happen when the time's right.
I feel like with what you were just saying, one of the I don't want to say problems, but one of the things that I tend to do as a person is I just assume everyone else feels the way I do, thinks the way I do, had my life experiences, has all the same reactions, right? So in a 12-step recovery that I was in, which happened to be Narcotics Anonymous for me, what it felt like was I was given this pretty prototypical way of working through my program, right? We have a step working guide that a lot of us used, and, we followed that, and I did that, and what I saw around me was mostly that, right? Like there was some small deviation. Somebody might not have used the step working guide. They used like some old dittos or something, but in general, it all looked pretty similar. And I think one of the downfalls of that for me was that it got me locked into this is what it needs to look like for everybody, right? And I guess my question is, I would imagine in your environment around so many different people with so much different aims or goals or anything like that. Like even when you were talking about the steps, you kind of go as like to the level you need to go or feel comfortable in that situation. I would imagine you have a much easier time having an open mind to like a billion different fucking ways recovery looks.
Yeah, I think I'm of the mindset that however people utilize them, and it's going to change and it's going to evolve, right? We'll see like when the book comes out how people do it, but we're also not going to be standing over people being like, no, this says this and that's the way it is. Like, we've already changed like a million things in there have changed since we started like having Zoom meetings, and that's the hardest part. That's mostly why the book isn't out, because once we see people how they react to it and what they say about it, it's like, oh, this could be better. So it's hard,
It'll
like
never come out at that rate. Murk.
Yeah.
I know. So and also it'll always be updated too. It will always change. Like our steps have changed a few times in, I don't know, the past like 6 months, just getting rid of words, changing little things. And I know you guys did an episode on the AA Big Book, and that's like one that refuses to change. And I don't know if I'm just too open-minded, but we're evolving everything in the world. But when we get into a recovery room, we're like, nope, this is all the same. And the whole world's like evolving around us and changing and adapting. But I don't know, we keep recovery the same way. Even things that don't work, right? They'll be like scientifically proven, and we're just like, well, that's just the way it is. So
Best
yeah,
friends.
I just
I'm
wish we could
telling
be
you.
let's just be more open-minded about recovery. It's obviously not what we think it is. Most of us are wrong,
Mm.
and like it's okay. Like let's just adapt this stuff a little bit. If we can help more people, why not? If you look at the numbers of people dying, it's something like 150 a day. Like, come on. And it's going up every year. The numbers just keep going up of people dying. Is it worth holding on to things so much because this is the way? Like, is the way that important to like let people die? I don't think it is.
Right.
Well, I was just gonna say, I like just being in this process of doing this podcast has opened me up to a lot of different ways. Typically I got into recovery really young. I was like 25, so AA was a room full of old drunk guys sitting in a basement that I felt like I had nothing in common with. So I ended up in in NA by default, and then of course in that fellowship, like it felt like that's the only way to recover. This is all there is, and then of course through, like you said, almost the result of seeing so many people dying, and seeing so many people just not stick around or it not work for them. Like, it helped me to see, like, this, what I do works for me, and it can work for some people, but it's not going to work for everyone. And that the more we can come together and support each other in our different recovery paths, the better off, we're all going to be. Because like Jason said, we have so much more in common than we have different, and if we could just support each other. So like one of my kind of goals with doing this podcast, and we've been talking about trying to open up a recovery community center in this area, is to bring people from these different fellowships together to like hang out together and support each other, and maybe have like a cookout where everybody's watching football, and we don't have to argue about whether you're on medication or I'm not, or you're an alcoholic and an addict, or you're this or that. Like, let's just forget that, and let's try to just support each other, raise each other up, be better human beings, and maybe more people will find life, less suffering,
Yeah, I love that. And man, I wish more people could be like that. And I think you have a great point, right? Like I said in the beginning, like we're just overly exposed to what's around us. And it's hard for a lot of people to take their self and their own personal experience out of it, right? Like, God, I see it all the time. Like, just people like, oh, this guy, like the other day, I heard this guy telling somebody like he had to be in a sober living for 2 years, and telling this guy, you need to be in a sober living for 2 years. And it's like, maybe he doesn't. Like, how do you know where he's going to be in a month or what's going on with him? Like, that's awesome that it worked for you, and I'm glad that it did. And also too, I mentioned this to Caroline, when a lot of times when we have these conversations, people take it personally, right? If I say I recover a different way, they feel attacked. Like, I have these conversations all the time where people are like, oh my God. And I'm like, dude, this is just how I'm doing this. Like, I'm staying alive and I'm doing well. I'm not telling you to do it. I don't think you should take medication. I don't think you should support harm reduction. If you don't, you don't, and that's your beliefs. But yeah, like people just hold on very close to what's helped them.
It is interesting, and I've actually started, because I see a lot of this online in like group discussions where there's kind of the more traditional 12-step view that's espoused by a few people, and there's a few people who have different views and are arguing against it, but it really does feel like sometimes, trying to be like more objective about it, that the 12-step view of recovery is kind of a lot of fear base in there, right? Like there's the love base of like wanting to live better and connect with other people and give back, and that's beautiful. And then there's also this fear base of like, oh my God, if you ever get near a drug, it might accidentally jump in your ear or something. Like, it's so weird, right? And I wonder, like, I like the idea, because that's what I see is this like very insecure, like fear reaction towards when people talk about doing it different ways.
Yeah, and it's so hard, right? Because like people need that. Maybe some people need that. Maybe they
Right.
need an older person to come to them, be like, you need to get your shit together. This is what you're going to do. This is when you're going to do it. But everybody doesn't need that. And it's hard. It's just hard for people to understand that, But like I said, the rest of the world's evolving. stigma, right? When Billy was talking, that's what I'm thinking about, right? Like all of us in recovery talk all this shit about stigma, right? Am I allowed to cuss?
Oh,
Yeah.
please.
Okay. But don't give me permission because it'll get out of control. But
That's fine. Okay.
yeah, well, let's talk about stigma, right? We all pretend, all of us in recovery pretend like we're out here fighting stigma and stuff, right? But like most of the outside world is glad that we're getting better. They're glad we're not stealing their stuff anymore. They're glad we're not smoking stuff and injecting stuff. Outside of that, they don't really care that much. But in the recovery community itself, you want to talk about stigma? I've never seen more stigma on a daily basis than I see come from within the recovery community. And to me, it's terrible. I hate that that's where it comes from.
It's the self-stigma. It's the stigma we hold ourselves to.
So, and I can say too, like I will defend, I'm a abstinence-based, and I'll defend that if people want to bash it or whatever. But at the same time, like I recognize like that's not necessarily right for everyone. And that what worked for me isn't, one size fits all. Like people have to find their own paths and do their own thing. But like you had said, like I've actually, and myself included early in my recovery, like I probably had more compassion for an active addict using on the street than I did for a person that went into a maintenance program. It was like there was a time in my recovery where I was like, oh, that's some easy way. There was just all this like stigma built into what I thought about that type of recovery. And it's just taken some like education to be like, well, that's dumb. Like these are just people trying to find a way that works for them to make their lives better. And if their lives are improving and they're getting better and they're able to like have a life where they're happy and not hurting themselves and other people, who the fuck am I to make a judgment about that? As long as they're not asking me to give up what I got, they should be able to do whatever they want.
I want to just keeping an eye on time here. There's some questions I really love to ask from each program, so I don't want to miss them. So if you don't mind, I want to make sure we hit on some of them. In the 12-step model, as I've been exposed to it, generally addiction is conceptualized as a disease. Narcotics Anonymous specifically kind of deviates and says, hey, we're a little different. We don't want to talk about where addiction comes from. We just want to talk about what you can do about it. But it's still from this disease concept idea. Does Mara have a specific take on addiction being a disease or not? Or does it conceptualize it completely different? Or does it say, you know what? We don't even give a fuck what it is. We're just here to feel safer in our lives.
I'll go with the third choice of
Okay.
We don't give a fuck.
Love it.
Because like I'm an evidence-based and a science-based person, and that's just a toss-up, right? It's like one study says today that it's this way, one study tomorrow says it's the other way. Who knows? We got here.
Okay, I got you. So we don't need to know completely how we look at it in order for it to be healed according to this program, which I'm not, that's not a judgment. That's just, an observation. Do you guys ever sign court slips? I know it's a little trickier in the virtual meetings.
Yeah. So we'll send people emails for verification. There was some controversy about it in the beginning, but yeah, we do that. And they're accepted. And actually, that's opened up a lot of doors, right? Like I've had probation officers call us and be like, hey, how do we get people into these meetings? Like I know people that are on medication. We require meetings. They don't want to go to any. Maybe this would be a better fit for them. How do we get it? And also like clinics that prescribe medication-assisted treatment. In some states, you have to attend like 2 meetings a week or whatever. And the doctors are like, well, I can't send them somewhere that tells them they can't be there and can't take the medication that I'm giving them. What do I do? So yeah, it creates more connection.
No, that's awesome. We actually had a listener reach out recently. We're going to go into this in another episode a little bit, but them and their husband got court ordered to recovery housing, and then the recovering housing actually kicked out the husband because they didn't allow couples to be in the place. And it was like, well, they were fucking court ordered. So just I've talked to people about how the court ordering of recovery is kind of a shady, it's actually like insurance fraud in some cases. But anyway, that's great that you guys are at least accepted. Like that's a good thing. I was hoping it wasn't the other way where you're like, no, they won't take us, because that'd be pretty fucked up. I did want to ask, in at least the Narcotics Anonymous version, and I think this holds true in a couple other ones that I've been into or more involved with, we kind of look at like spiritual principles as the ideal of how to combat these self-centered behavior of an addict, I guess is the way NA sort of says it. So what do you guys like look at as the solution to the way you live unsafely? Or how do you look at like ways, like what do you put in place of living unsafely that you feel like is helping treat the underlying problems? Sorry, that's a big one.
That's a big one. I guess it would be the hopes that somebody could find that through the steps, the traditions, and the connections that they make in meetings.
That they can find a place where they don't have to live as unsafely anymore?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's such a broad thing, right? Like being safer can mean a whole lot of different things for some people. For me, it means not driving 80 miles per hour, cutting people off, stealing shit. But for some people, it's like smoke not inject today, or smoke a little bit less, or do a little bit less. And
No, I could see where that's a hard question to answer, but I like what you said, right? And I love that you threw connection in there with the steps and traditions, because the further I'm getting into, you know, my therapy work, the more I feel like connection is one of the biggest pieces of healing that probably anybody, whether you're struggling with disordered substance use or just, you know, the guy who is struggling, feeling not so great about the job he's in on a regular basis, like we need this connection to be part of our healing. Anybody else have some questions?
No, I just, I'm curious. Just a new MARA meeting opened up. I would say in our area, it's actually in the next county over, Harford County, and it's a pretty new meeting. So have you seen, like, I don't know how you measure good growth, but what's like kind of the growth rate been like, or how can people reach out to start a meeting or get a meeting going in their area?
Okay, so I'd say the growth's been pretty good. Like I said, we haven't done any kind of outreach or anything, and the growth has been pretty good. You know, we used to have like 1, maybe 3 Zoom meetings a week, and now we have multiple ones every day of the week. In person is picking back up. I think it'll get better here soon. When people do want to start meetings, the first thing that we tell them to do is like come to a few meetings first, because we've had people start meetings and they think it's like NA that accepts medication, and it's not. So it can be confusing. So we really want to make sure people get the concept of what's going on here. Like, hey, we created this thing to be an alternative to other things, and it's not them. So yeah, the best thing people can do is start coming to some meetings and like listen to what's going on and see what's going on, and make sure, first of all, it's something you can tolerate, right? Because if not, it could be uncomfortable. And then, you can go to the website and you can click on starting a meeting. There's just a simple meeting format guide and the traditions, the steps, and the openings and closings around there.
Cool. And then have you found, or do you know if like meetings are starting or beginning to be offered in like treatment centers or places like that? Like, is that a thing that's in the works or happening?
So we have a few, that are in treatment centers. In the past, there was a lot, especially through COVID. There was a lot of recovery community centers. I run one out of my recovery community center. Actually, that meeting is how I got where I'm at today. Like, I met people on there that were running it 2 years ago, and I was just like took up interest in like the language that they were using, how they were talking to people, and I ended up like coming here and making connections, and we still run that meeting today. And we have a lot of like sober living houses, halfway houses that come to and run meetings.
So I was thinking there's another question on my questions list for people, and this might go back a little bit and help explain some what it is that gets replaced or shifted in recovery mode in MARA. So the question is like, what's the new passion, right? We have to, all this time and energy and resources we put into using all day, every day, or trying to keep our self feeling in a place of relief all the time. That's all got to be replaced with a new focus in recovery, I would at least my take is, we got to fill that with something, right? And I think maybe to answer this for you a little bit, like part of what you were describing in this new world of your mind being open to like live safely, right? Like this whole new concept of like, what is my actual intention and goal in life? Like, I feel like that shifts your focus and gives you a shit ton of time to fill your time up with like, what does living safely mean to me? What does it mean in different areas of my life? Like, you're just coming at it from a different frame of reference in your brain, which is going to make you see all these situations anew. And I think that's kind of one of the neat things of the idea of living safely almost in itself sort of is part of the recovery process as you go.
Yeah, and so add healthy to that, right? Add healthy lifestyle to that, and I think if somebody's going to stay busy for the next, like, I don't know, couple decades,
lifetime,
and
yeah,
things are coming, and that's what it's supposed to be, right? We hear it all the time, like it's mind, it's body, spirit, and all these things, but like we neglect the shit out of our bodies and our minds,
right? And
we just show up and make connections, and yeah. So yeah, for me personally, like that's been huge. Like I'm living healthier, I'm living safer, I'm doing things that I wouldn't have considered doing if I would have just kept a focus on like my substance use, because honestly that's like a very small part of what got me here at this point. It was yeah, it was some other traumatic shit that got me here, that I was just self-medicating. And through doing that, I developed a chaotic relationship with substances, and they just happen to be illegal and there's stigma around them. And I think, to be honest with you, I think that if I came up the way I did in a different world and did the things I did, and the things weren't viewed the way that they were, I think that it would be much different. And I try to be open-minded and think about that when people are still going through it, right? Like especially like stigma and bias and things like that. Like we all have a bias, an internal bias. We're all from somewhere. We all know certain things. Like that's internalized for us, but we can recognize it. So when I see people today that are struggling with using substance, I always think like, oh man, if this person lived in whatever country, they'd just be like everybody else. They would go somewhere and get dosed. They would go to their job and they'd go about their day. Why should I look at them any differently because they happen to live in the exact place that they do, and it's stigmatized?
Right. No, so I was thinking about this idea of like this new concept of living safely and healthily, right? Healthily? Yeah, I guess. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of the more traditional 12-step, fourth step, right? This is the idea where we're supposed to kind of go into it not criticizing or looking for flaws or perfection in us. It's more just like, let's just put the story on paper and see what it looks like, and where we're not getting our intended goals because we're like thwarting ourselves from getting there. But I actually like almost the concept of your guys' version better. And maybe that's something, if you're working a more traditional fourth step, you can take in and have in your mind, like this idea of I'm trying to live healthier and safer. I feel like that's a less judgmental standpoint, because even when I went into fourth step, like I'm like, oh, I'm not going to be judgmental. And then I judged the fuck out of myself for all the shit I did. But I was judging myself based on somebody else's categories, right? Society's morals, always, because I didn't have this exposure of like, what do I just want to do to live safer and healthier? Like if I can take everybody else's bullshit out, I feel like it's so much simpler to just start from there and go.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to take everyone's bullshit out of there, but man, when we do, that's when we get the real growth, right? That's why I think that this program is really just set up to empower people, right? Like the whole point in those steps is we find our true voice within. We're not finding it anywhere else. We're not finding it from this person that's mentoring me or sponsoring me or a higher power or whatever else it is. It's me, right? It's like my true voice. I can walk around, I can judge things and make decisions and be comfortable with it. Yeah. And our fourth step, if you look, it's like strengths, weaknesses, and misconceptions. And man, that one was so good for me. It was so much more empowering than the other ways I've done it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll add too, also, I'm a person that suffers from violent trauma in my past and a bunch of other trauma. So that was extra hard for me. And I'm not saying, I'm sure it's great for some people, but for me, it was awesome that I didn't have to get into all of that shit. I just went straight to the weaknesses or misconceptions that I've developed from those things happening. And then where does that go to? That goes to my behaviors today, right? Like, how can I change how I react to those things? And I love CBT, you know, and it takes me to that, and that still gets me through the day today.
So some of the lesser known maybe side rules of 12-step fellowships I always find fascinating too. And Caroline already mentioned one, like sponsorship is not actually in Narcotics Anonymous literature. It's just kind of this informal thing. That's not completely true. There is a pamphlet about it, but it's not in the main book or anything like that. So like we have rules about like, and they're not technically rules, but like don't get into relationships in your first year, or, you know, hey, we don't crosstalk in these meetings generally. Like, do you find that any of those, does Mara have its own subset of like, they're not really rules. They're almost just like expectations of the society or the community who's a part of the program. Do you guys have any of that? Do you not crosstalk? Do you care about anything?
No, we crosstalk. The only thing we're not going to do is like, I'm not going to like let people interrupt people or whatever. Obviously ask people if they're like accepting of feedback, but yeah, that other stuff, man, when I hear people say shit like that, like, oh yeah, you know, I'm not allowed to get into a relationship, I'm just like, where did that come from? Like, who told you that?
Treatment.
Like, what's the original
That's
source?
where it came from, was treatment.
Yeah, and like that probably is true for a lot of people, but I think you're missing the whole concept of like, more importantly, we should be saying like, are you a whole person right now? Do you love yourself? Are you capable of loving and taking care of yourself to the point where you could add another human being into that mix? And the answer is either going to be yes or no. And the answer is not going to be, it's not going to have a time in it. I think if we like studied that, we wouldn't come up with a time frame. I think, I know people that like married people in rehab and they've been together for 25 years and everyone told them they shouldn't do it. So I think when we make some of those bold statements that like some dude at an AA meeting 38 years ago just said to somebody and it got picked up, like we have to be realistic, right? And like a lot of the shit that we hear in these like little side rules, somebody just said it to somebody and it probably benefited them, so they just kept saying it to people and it's been passed along like the game of telephone. And I guess my answer to that is like, just don't take that stuff too serious.
Well, we
Just
have an out
don't.
for that. It's called take what you need and leave the rest.
Right.
And that's also so another thing too is like, I love it when people come to meetings, I ask questions, right? Because I know a lot of people, if you go to a traditional meeting, you ask a question, you're going to hear shit like that. Like he just said, like, take what you want and leave the rest. And it's like, yeah, but I'm asking a question. Like I'm asking specifically, like I'm reading this and we shared on this, but like, how does this pertain to my life every day? Like, how do I do this? And people will just like, don't want to answer things. So I think that's why I like doing things like this. We can just like answer questions. And if I don't have an answer, I'm just going to be like, I don't know. We have no idea. Like, we don't know how that works. And it's okay.
Are you married, Murk?
No.
Do you want to be?
Are you proposing?
I really have fell in love with Murk during this episode. He has just said some beautiful pieces of words that I am like, this is wonderful.
So I don't know. I'm 36. I do have 3 sons. But I've never been married, and I think it's worked out pretty well.
Oh, okay. All
so
right.
far.
Fair enough. So I will say, as we're getting towards the end here, I do feel like, and maybe I understand why, but I do feel like you guys missed a golden opportunity with your name, because it just seemed to fit so well with Medication-Assisted Treatment Anonymous, right? Because you guys get treated so bad in the traditional meetings that it would be MATA, because you guys matter, right? Like, you know what I mean? I just thought it was beautiful.
That's good.
But then I saw how people might say, oh, treatment, it's not actually a recovery program. It's a treatment program. And that could be fucking
so yeah, if you look through like SAMHSA and everywhere, a lot of the language is changing, and it's going more medication-assisted recovery than it is medication-assisted treatment. So I don't know, maybe we'll benefit from that.
Yeah, no, it's a good thing. Does anybody have any final thoughts or anything you wanted to know that we didn't get to? Or
Oh, I did think of one other thing. So is there an emphasis on like I know in a lot of the other 12-step fellowships, there's this big emphasis on like service to others and this like newcomer idea. Do they put any emphasis on anything like that?
Yeah, so the newcomer thing that goes back to not having any kind of a hierarchy, right? People are definitely gonna be supportive when people come in and they've never seen them before. That's gonna happen, but we're not, yeah, we try not to like use that term or label people. We just would like to welcome them. And what was the second part? I forget. I got
Oh, is there
sidetracked.
like an emphasis on like service to others, like having a service structure and being involved in that sort of thing for individual members, or is it just each person, if they're interested, does it?
So I think that gets incorporated into the steps. If you get into the steps, it is. But no, I have my own thoughts on like service work, right? Like I think it's great, but I've also seen it harm people, right? Like just I don't know, just oh yeah, do this in the name of service, or like earn your keep here by doing all this service, and then you can do this or be this. So it kind of just contributes to that hierarchy thing. I think everybody should, and they should do their own form. And I think they should just not share it with anybody. I think we should all do great things and just have enough humility to shut up and do it for the reason that we're doing it, right? Like, if I'm going to go out today and I'm going to go get $100 out of the ATM in like fives and give it to homeless people, I should just do it. And I shouldn't record it and tell everybody, or like come to the meeting and share like, yeah, so I passed out all these five yesterday at all these bums on Patton Ave, like, yeah. So that's my personal take on service work.
I gotta say, and this has never really occurred to me before, but what it feels like you guys say, because there was another thing that we had asked about that he said they don't feel like they need to tell people to do that. It just kind of happens. Like the sponsorship, that's what it was, right? It makes me feel like the program standpoint, whether this was intentional or not, is that if we can just help people feel better, like the rest of this comes naturally, right? Like these are the people we were kind of meant to be, or the humans we were born to be. And if we can just get the pain and the healing and stuff taken care of, all the other shit's fine. And what it made me think of when you asked about the 12-step or the steps in service and stuff, I was like, are we the same like the Christians who feel like they have to enforce the idea of being a good person through hell? Like if you're not scared of going to hell, you'll never be a good person. Is that what we're doing in our recovery too? You better be of service because that's how it's done. Like we can't just trust that people will be that way, that they'll just be good people naturally.
Well, I don't know if that's the intention, but that sometimes is the result.
It was interesting.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't know that we intended that either, but I mean, we are based on Christian
Well,
things,
there's an intention, I think, that like I do service work for others and it makes me feel good about who I am and it builds up my self-esteem and self-worth and all that stuff. But it gets implemented in a way that's like someone comes in and they're new and you tell them to get involved in service and they may not have had enough growth to be really good at it, or they may be taking on positions that they're not really ready to take on because a sponsor or somebody else told them they had to,
Yeah, I love that you said that, and I feel the exact same way. I think the more people can just focus on themselves and getting well, the better. And like, don't worry about other people until that naturally, authentically comes to you. And that's another thing, right? So, God, I could talk about this all day, but you're talking about the service work and how it's emphasized in there. We got to think, what was it, 1935 when the programs that comes from was developed, and maybe back then it did need to be said to people, like it was a very different society and a different time, and I could see it fitting back then, like people wore suits and like opened doors for people, so like that probably fit back then. And I think that if ever that place, program, whatever, updated their book, that could be something that would be very different, along with all the other stigmatizing.
Burn. We're saying fuck the big book. That's what I said. That's not what Murk said. Oh, and Mara definitely did not say that. Also interesting that Mara is like one of the characters from the story of Buddha, but that's a whole nother thing and spelled differently. Anyway, Murk, it has been a real pleasure to have you on here today. Please give us again the website address. That will be like the most crucial place for most of these online listeners to find out how to get their way to a meeting if they're interested in this.
Okay, so it's MARA international.org. And that's
Okay.
where you can find all the information. You can click on online meetings, and the list of all the Zoom links and times will come up. It'll show all the in-person meetings too. Tradition, steps, meeting format guide. If someone is interested in starting a meeting, there's an email address on there. And also, I would like to say, we do a thing called a marathon on Christmas. So it starts at 7 o'clock on Christmas Eve, and then it runs for 24 hours. We've been doing that for like 3 years, and that will be on the website. You know, it's, oh man, the first year we did it, and last year, like, people struggle around the holidays, right? And man, the first one I opened it a couple years ago at 7 o'clock, and somebody came in there, and man, they were in the man, they were down, you know, they were in the depths of substance use and at the end of their life, and man, they just came in there and talked for 20 minutes, and it got that person through the night. And I think that's huge too. Allowing people that are still struggling into a space and just treating them like a human being goes so far. And that's our intention, right? Is like anybody that feels they have the desire to be there should be there. So yeah, that 24-hour marathon is great, and that'll be on the website too. And there's a Facebook group.
That's awesome. Yeah. So check out the Facebook group. If you are not driving or operating heavy machinery or like weapons right now, you can just scroll down your little podcast page, and the links will be right there underneath. So you don't even have to remember them. You can just tap on the links, and we will put the links to Mara International and also the Facebook group. That way they can find it. Murk, again, thank you so much for coming on, man. I think it takes bravery and courage and being okay with yourself to, this is why you're in a different program, because it's scary to be real about your experience sometimes in our world. So I appreciate you doing that and for coming on. And this has just been awesome, man.
Yes, thank you very much.
I appreciate you all having me. And I know like it's a hard conversation to have, but when we have productive conversations around this, I think it's so impactful and it's so important. Like you said in the beginning, like we're all trying to do the same thing, right? We're just trying to live better and find our way. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, everybody, go out there, check out Mara, give it to you or your friends, whoever needs that place of compassion, of unconditional positive regard, maybe even unconditional love. Check it out. All right, have a good week. Did you like this episode? Share it with people you think might get something out of it. Check out the rest of our episodes at recoverysortof.com. Also, while you're there, you can find ways to link up with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, YouTube, anything. We're always looking for new ideas. Got an idea you want us to look into? Reach out to us.